This is Stephen Beschloss. For anyone paying attention, it's impossible to miss how much of the second Trump term has been focused on advancing white supremacy. This has meant denying Black voices and voters, rejecting the promise of racial equality, and making the lives of far too many Americans more painful and fraught with fear. I believe that so many of our nation's struggles and failures tied to this history of race and racism, dating not just back to the founding 250 years ago, but to the history of slavery dating back over 400 years. There's no one that I wanted to discuss this topic with more than Eddie S. Glaude, the brilliant Princeton historian and professor of African American Studies, an MS Now political analyst and best-selling author. He's just published an important new book entitled America, U.S.A, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries, which grapples with the morally dubious nature of many of America's national celebrations as they prioritize the freedom of white Americans. And what struck me in reading is how raw and bracing, indeed how blistering his observations are as he confronts the past, present, and future. His opening chapter is titled Bitterness at the Bottom of the Cup, which he describes like this: bitterness settles in the heart of a child, and innocence is lost because the world announces in stark terms that you, no matter how young you may be, do not belong here. This happens in every corner of the country. With that, I hope you'll find our conversation valuable. Eddie, what a delight to talk with you. Honestly, I'm a big fan and appreciate your brilliant new book, America, U.S.A.
Well, I'm honored to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you, Stephen. This is wonderful.
Thanks so much. So let's jump right in. The last 17 months since Trump was inaugurated have been painful for so many of us in so many ways, including his and his regime's attacks on racial justice, dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, denying and erasing the history of systemic racism and slavery, advancing white supremacists and white supremacy thinking. How difficult, how painful have these last 17 months been for you?
Well, I mean, it's been very, very difficult on a number of different levels. You know, that has involved this, all of the things you've just laid out has involved an all-out assault on American higher education, where I work. But more than that, the idea that we're here in the 250th year of the country just enrages you. And then there's the more intimate reality that people have to raise their babies in this. And here we are in the 250th year, and you have people declaring that the country only belongs to them, and that any success that I may have achieved or anyone of my color may have achieved is somehow because of affirmative action and the like, that we by definition can't do anything by merit, is enraging. But you know, we say Twain said it, but he didn't quite say it. He didn't, you know, we don't know if he really said it, but history might not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get to the history. I want to sort of stay a little bit more in the present for the moment, or at least in kind of recent years. In the Obama and Biden years, there was a real effort, I think, to confront the history of race and racism. First, do you agree, and do you see the victory of Trump in both 2016 and 2024 to be directly tied to race and the struggle, you know, to confront racism and move toward greater equality?
Well, I think in part, and you know, I think the Obama administration, the Biden administration tried to manage how we told our story, how we dealt with the reality of racism and racism in our past and present. Obama was more constrained than Biden. There was a sense in which they embraced the story or African American history in such a way that it would affirm America's inherent goodness, as opposed to challenging that myth. So President Obama narrated the Black freedom struggle in a particular sort of way. I thought, you know, that President Biden in Tulsa offered a kind of approach, because Tulsa doesn't lend itself to an easy absorption into the American story of more perfect union because it's so violent and the like. That speech was really important to me. So I want to say that, they both, because of who Obama was as the first black president, Biden as the first vice president to the first black president, and the first president to have a black a woman of color as the vice president, there was this attempt to deal with race in a way that would fit with the American story. Trump is, in so many ways, I think you're right, a backlash to that.
Yeah.
His election is rooted in this sense that some people feel that they're losing control over the country, that the demographic shifts, the fear of great replacement has generated a kind of panic and terror. And Trump is the avatar for that panic and terror, right? As people claim the country as their own.
Well, and you have been surely not surprised by that, but I'm wondering whether, and we'll get into sort of the way in which that's sort of played out in your thinking as you sort of look throughout history and look throughout sort of the different anniversaries, the celebrations that the country participates in. But I'm wondering whether the level of the virulence of it, the level of it, the scale of it, and that takes us right up to the present. Have you been surprised by the intensity of it?
Not so much surprised, enraged
Yeah.
by it, but not so much surprised. I think that the quickness of it has surprised me. I mean, when we think about it, just 6 years ago, we were in the midst of a racial reckoning. I was crying on television. We all watched George Floyd killed during the height of the pandemic, people risking their lives, coming out in the streets and the like. And then in the blink of an eye, we're talking about overreach. We're talking about trans athletes. We're talking about affirmative action and DEI and the like. I think it's the quickness of it all.
Yeah.
That is the surprise, but not the content, but just the pace that has been a bit unsettling for me.
Yeah, a pace plus intensity. In other words, not that it wasn't there, sort of underneath the facade, but oh my God, that the virulence of it and the openness of it, right? The sense of being unfettered. To say exactly what racists think out loud.
Yeah, I think what Donald Trump has done is given people license to say the quiet part out loud. And what I think is so important or so insidious about what he's done is that I think Trump and his folk want to be white without judgment. Mm. And so that particular desire, and along with this idea that the country belongs only to them, has I think intensified something that is familiar.
Yeah.
In a moment that is in some ways has historical precedent, but is in some ways unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean we're not going back, Kamala Harris said, and oh boy, the intensity of going back has been remarkable and obviously deeply upsetting. And look, one of your responses, you've written about the necessity, and you've just talked about it, the necessity of a racial reckoning with our history and the assumptions of white superiority, the recent Supreme Court decision gutting the Voting Rights Act, southern states quickly pushing to redraw their maps to deny black voters their voices surely underscores this. So what would this racial reckoning entail, and do you think it's still possible?
I believe, and I argue this in the book, that America suffers from a kind of double consciousness. In 1903, W.B. Du Bois, the first African-American to receive a PhD from Harvard, wrote The Souls of Black Folk. And he argued that African-Americans suffered from what he called a double consciousness, that we see ourselves through the eyes of those who despise us. In the book, I argue that that is actually a consequence of the divided soul of the nation, that America imagines itself at once as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And we see that kind of enshrined in the contradictions embedded in the Constitution itself. And so what will we do? What do we have to do in order to engage in the kind of reckoning that is required? Well, we're going to have to grow up, right? We're going to have to leave the fantasies and the myths behind and actually make a choice. Are we going to be a beacon of freedom? And we can debate what that means. Or we're going to be a white republic, because we can't be both.
Yeah.
Because if you try to be both, it deposits a madness at the heart of the country where we find ourselves in this repeated cycles. So, I think as we confront this 250th year and we see all around us the decline of American hegemony across the board, I think it's important for us, we the people, to confront the reality that we have to finally put some of this stuff behind us. We have to make a choice. And folks like J.D. Vance and the like, they want to argue that creed, blood and soil is more than creed. They want to make the claim that this is a white republic.
Yeah, and they've been pushing that not only in the United States, they've been going throughout Europe and scolding European countries for not being more extreme in their embrace of sort of white supremacy.
Absolutely, and you can't finesse that. So I think one of the ways in which the country has tried to finesse its divided soul is by holding the belief, at least some of us, that freedom is the possession of white Americans to give and to take away.
Yeah.
And we just can't, we got to put all of that behind us if we're going to get to the other side of this madness, it seems to me.
So the fourth question, and you've set it up, in fact, which is the need to go back and rewind to the Declaration of Independence, maybe in some ways the roots of the divided soul, a document that nobly asserts that all men are created equal, and yet it failed to confront slavery and the reality at that time of some 500,000 enslaved people in the country, 500,000 out of a total population of about 2.5 million. You've described it, your words, as morally dubious, which might be a polite way of putting it. How do you view its meaning for us today, for all of us, but particularly for Black Americans?
I think it's important for us to understand that the principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the ideals animating the Constitution are not God sent. They are the results of fallible human beings, and they still have meaning, even as fraught and vexed as the conditions under which they were articulated were. So I don't want to cast away the idea that all men and women are created equal. I don't want to cast away the idea of representative government. I am intensely a Democrat, small d, right? And so, but I think in order for these ideals to have meaning, this is what Douglass was trying to do by reading the Declaration into the preamble.
Yeah.
But then you had the compromises of the actual Constitution around the transatlantic slave trade, around the three-fifths clause, around the fugitive slave clause, right? We've been living with those contradictions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to take hold of those ideals in a realistic way and give voice and give life to what a genuinely multiracial democracy would look like. And, we've only tried to do this since 1965.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, we can go back, and I'm thinking about the Constitution, the forging of that document. Now we're not talking 1776, but 1787, and there was an opportunity, there was a desire. You did write about it to address slavery in that document, and the fear was that if they did so, the Southern states were going to abandon the signing, and there would not have been the development of a genuinely national country. So this struggle, this sort of this morally dubious struggle, seems to have been something that we have failed to confront really from our earliest days.
Yeah, because in so many ways, I think we approach racial justice like a philanthropic enterprise. It's a charitable gesture, as opposed to being a constitutive practice. Freedom is not an end. Freedom is not an achievement. It's a practice.
Yeah.
So
So,
it's
so
ongoing.
the granting of racial justice is not is not something that you just give. It's not a as you put it, a philanthropic gesture. That it really has to be something that is a shared commitment.
Right. In 1875, Frederick Douglass was very clear. I don't want your alms, he
Mm.
says. I want justice. I don't want alms. I don't want charity. And so I think going back to the question, I think it's important if we're going to get to the other side of this madness, we're going to have to finally make a choice. Who are we going to be?
Yeah, yeah. So let's just play with this for a moment. Is it possible that that the horrors of this particular period, when people see the extremism of this kind of white supremacist mindset, do we have an opportunity for the pendulum to swing another way? Is that part of the potential here, that people see this and enough Americans finally say enough is enough?
Potentially, but I think we have to do it in a way that is not Pollyannish or sentimentalized. And here's the example. The example is Wisconsin. You think about what Scott Brown did in that state. You think about how far right he tried to pull the state, and the way in which that state has kind of recalibrated, the way in which they're thinking about policy and the like. So I think there's an opportunity, but it can't be one that is about forgetting. It can't be one where we just simply lose sight of the fact that for 3 elections, millions of people voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Historic turnout. So,
More than 77 million in the last, and 89 million people who were not motivated enough to rebuke him, that they stayed home.
and so we have to deal with the fact that it's not Donald Trump is an avatar for something much more fundamental. And so, I say this to my students all the time with regards to the Civil War, with regards to the mid-20th century. There are these moments where we try to address the disease, but we never remove the tumor. And so we could very well swing back, but I don't know. To be honest with you, Steve, I can say this: I don't know if we will ever establish our place on the global stage again.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is a problem, but I think the globe has concluded that the American people, they voted for him put him in office twice. So there's a deep distrust, not only of Donald Trump, but of the nature of our politics that would produce him twice.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back in time, and again use that. And I want to end where I'm going to get to is Frederick Douglass. But what I want to talk about first, is the book, which is a powerful, beautifully written work, and it probes key anniversaries in which Americans tell stories about themselves, about who they are, about what it means to be American. And I want you to talk about what American story you believe needs to be more clearly, honestly told, to both confront and get closer to the truth of American history and experience.
Yeah.
And as a corollary, let me just add this one other note. How should we view this 250th year documenting the country's founding?
Well, that's an easy question. The second part.
Yeah.
We should view it skeptically. We should understand that there's going to be a storybook version of the country that bears no resemblance to our lived reality. There's going to be an attempt to yoke the story of the country to Donald Trump's presidency. And I think it's important for Americans of all colors, of all political orientations and the like, to really display the full diversity of the country as a counter to what we're going to experience this July 4th. In terms of, the story that I embrace.
Yes.
It's a much more tragic story, but not tragic in the kind of common sense understanding of tragedy, but tragedy in a dramatic sense, right? What do we learn from the tragic poets? What do we learn from Melville? What do we learn from Eugene O'Neill? What do we, to go back to Twain, what do we learn from the writers who've grappled with the issue of race at the heart of the country? What does it mean to read Faulkner in all of his complexity? This man who can draw these characters that reflect the landscape, and then at the same time says he's going to come out in the street and shoot people in defense of the state of Mississippi because we're moving too fast. The story I want is a blue soap story, a story that doesn't require America to be the greatest nation in the history of the world, but a story that really gives voice to the fits and starts, where we fall short, the ugliness of what we've done, that can release us into a different way of being together, a different way of inhabiting the world, because we're adolescent. And I say that with Peter Pan in my mind, right? I'm thinking about the lost boys and lost girls, right? They were lived in Never Land. And what was so distinctive about them is that they didn't want to grow up. They didn't want to be responsible. And so you can bomb Iran and the Strait of Hormuz and then say, somebody else come fix it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be responsible for what you're doing in black sites with illegal detentions and the like. You don't have to worry about the humanitarian evil that's being done in your name in Cuba. You don't have to worry about the genocide in Palestine. We don't have to do any of that, right? And so I just want us to grow the hell up. And in order to do that, we got to tell ourselves better stories. And that's Aristotle.
Yeah.
Right? Stories. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Steve.
No. It strikes me that that part of the problem, and this in some ways it's a strange thing. Part of the problem of not growing up is that we've had these very strong myths about in some sense, the nobility of the American idea, the American ideal. The promise of equality, the promise of the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and that all of that somehow gave many Americans sort of the belief that we are indeed exceptional, and that exceptionalism, rather than it leading us to be smarter, actually leads us to be more foolish in the inability to engage our humanness, right? Which is about struggle and complexity and success, but also failure.
Yeah, and I don't want to be naive. Every country has its myths, right? Every country has its stories about its own greatness. But in the American story, we don't have defeat. We don't have the South has defeat, but we don't have a sense of the shards of glass beneath our feet that make our way of life possible. And I think it's important for us to tell that story. So 1876, Reconstruction is collapsing, 600,000 dead on land and sea. And the country tells itself a story that ignores it all. It disremembers. 1926, the 150th, World War I, right? We've got the Klan reborn. We have nativism flaring up all over the country, attacking Irish, Italian, Jew, those Europeans who are coming from the European S-hole countries, right? We got all of that happening, so much so that the Klan claims as its seminal piece of legislation the Johnson-Reed Immigration and Nationality Act of 1924, which these folk today want to go back to.
Right.
And then we have the nerve to want to celebrate the nation's birth and allow the Klan to have its annual convention on the same grounds. They're going to lift up the flag and burn a cross at the same time.
Yeah.
So at each moment in which we've had to tell ourselves a story about who we are, we confront the ugliness of what we've done and what we continue to do, but we push it to the side.
Yeah.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
Who would we be if we actually were able to embrace the, in your words, sort of the ugliness, right? And embrace the failure along with the success?
Perhaps we could be a beacon of freedom. right? Because the monster isn't out there, right? With the angels and the devil is in the mirror. It's us.
Yeah.
And the moment you kind of excise it, the moment you move it out of yourself and place it over there, right? You set the stage, in my view, for you to become monstrous in some ways, right? So I think for me, telling ourselves a fuller story, and particularly in this moment when the ugly underbelly of America is in full view,
Yeah.
countering that narrative that justifies all of that ugliness with the complexity, the beautiful complexity, the beautiful struggle of this nation,
Right.
it seems to me the best antidote to open up the pathway for us to be otherwise, because we can't go back to what was. We have to imagine being together differently if the country's going to survive. And there's no guarantee that it will.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the Statue of Liberty. And Lady Liberty, you know, people tend to focus on the torch as a beacon, a light for people of the world. What they usually forget is that in the statue's base, the sculptor wisely understood the complexity of the story, and it was a response to the abolition of slavery. So at Lady Liberty's feet are her chains of bondage.
Exactly. And we need to understand that, you know? We need to understand, you know,
Both.
that purpose. Yes, indeed.
So in a few weeks, we'll be experiencing the 4th of July. This is the sixth question. Like you, I think, you know, and I see Frederick Douglass's address delivered on July 5th, 1852, to be one of history's greatest speeches. The speech, which was called, and I forgot to write the name of it down.
What to the slave is the 4th of July.
Right. What to the slave is the 4th of July. And as you describe it in the book, and I'm going to quote you here, Douglass lays bare the tragic split that compromised the foundation of American democracy. And what Douglass demanded and what the country requires is a confrontation with that aspect of itself that clings to the idea that it is a white republic and that freedom only belongs to white people. My question, what lesson can we learn from Frederick Douglass now?
Oh, wow. You know, at the end of that speech, he says, there's a serpent coiled up in the bosom of the nation. And he begs the young nation to remove it, right, in order to free itself. What I try to do in America, U.S.A. is I try to pull not just simply the 1852 address, but his 1875 address into our current moment. I think Douglass was making a moral argument that if the country was to be better, it would have to honestly confront itself, not just remember. I can remember when I was hurt by my father. I can remember it when I can remember the moment, the experience, what it did, how I felt. But if I don't confront it, then that memory is not going to fundamentally change how I live my life. So Douglass is not just asking for us to remember. He's asking us to confront it and its meaning, the meaning of what we've done in the past, for how we move in our current days. And I think if we did that, we can understand why we would elect an adolescent, an 80-year-old child. And I'm using that language, 80-year-old adolescent.
Yeah.
That's the exact same language, Steve.
Yeah.
James Baldwin used to describe Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, and in some ways, I mean, the Frederick Douglass to me sort of represents the avatar of this doubleness. I mean, somebody who survived the incredible torture as an enslaved man and somehow was able to not only sort of become a free man, but to operate at this extraordinary level of genius, to be able to articulate his experience, but also to be able to visualize, to envision, to imagine, to embrace sort of the ideals of the American Republic without forgetting where he came from.
Indeed, indeed. He's an iconic figure in the American story, in my view. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much. This is the 6 questions. I'm extremely happy to have had the chance to talk with you. The book is important. People should read it. People should listen to you. It's always a delight to hear from you. And before I let you go,
Sure, that.
I have one more thing, a lightning round, 6 more questions. You can answer with a single word or a brief explanation. You ready?
Okay. Yes, let's go.
What makes you happy?
Reading.
What makes you angriest?
Lies. The country lying to itself. Yeah.
What is your favorite word?
Complexity.
What living person do you most admire?
Oh, what living person I most admire? My mom.
Do you want to give a sentence why? Sentence may not be enough.
No, 9th grade, she had her first baby. And her and my dad raised some extraordinary people under extraordinary circumstances. They are giants in my view. And my mom is the most loving person.
What historical person do you most admire?
So many.
Hard to pick.
Hard to pick. What historical person I most admire? These days, I would say Douglass. Frederick Douglass, yeah, these days. But, Baldwin will show up another day. Malcolm X might show up on another day. Tony, so it all depends on which day you catch me.
What gives you hope?
Other human beings, us. I know we have the capacity to be monsters, but we also have the capacity to be miracles. And I want to double down on the capacity of human beings to be miraculous. So yeah, us.
And in this moment, with all of its tragedy, with all of its complexity, with all of its horror, you still carry hope about where we're going.
I do, but in this moment, as my student taught me, she said, perhaps it's not about hope. She said, what we need to do is to tell the truth, carried with love, and lit by rage. So we have to bear witness. We have to bear witness in our time, and maybe that will open up the space for hope to flourish.
Well, that sounds exactly like the place we ought to conclude. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for those questions.
My pleasure. Look forward to talking again.
Indeed. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.